Well, it's the fall of 1998, and in WCW, the New World Order has been overexposed to the point there are now two versions of the group, albeit one still highly popular, and that of the Wolfpack. But now we're going to take a step back from booking philosophy, going away from the gritty realism of the NWO, and now we're going to see what the Ultimate Warrior can do with his own brand of spooky mysticism. It's time to look at WCW Fall Brawl 1998 from September 13th at the Lawrence Joel Veterans Memorial Coliseum in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. This show was nominated by Mr. Bleh, John Averick, Adam Vanderplum, and Nick Brown over at patreon.com/wrestlingwithwregret. That is the big development right now in WCW, is the debut of the Ultimate Warrior. It happened a couple of weeks after Road Wild in Sturgis, and so after Hulk Hogan had already gone through all the other kind of retreads of Hulkamania in WCW, going against the Monsters, going against the Giants, going against Randy Savage and whatnot. Now they're going to try and recreate the magic of WrestleMania 6 by having a return match coming up between Hogan and the Warrior. And so the Warrior makes his big debut. He does this big long promo. It famously goes way over its time, but the fans really dig it as it's happening here. I love how, though, during the speech, every once in a while after Warrior says a line, you just hear this one horn in the crowd going brrr after he says something. It's hilarious.
No sadder sight than when
and he's made it clear from the jump he is going to start his own new revolution in WCW, a one warrior nation, as it were. So of course it makes all the sense in the world he would be immediately lumped into a team environment when it comes to this evening's main event of War Games. Yep, that's WCW for you. But I don't mean to poke too much fun, because there are a lot of interesting storylines in WCW at this time. Some you will see shown on this evening's pay-per-view, some you won't. For instance, Eddie Guerrero has recently been doing kind of a kayfabe line blurring angle where, they're taking this incident that allegedly sprang up between he and Eric Bischoff before, where coffee was allegedly thrown at Eddie Guerrero. It turned out to be kind of an overblown thing, but Eddie's doing this thing now where he goes to the ring in his street clothes and says he's not going to wrestle tonight. He's mad at upper management, at Eric Bischoff, and basically is refusing to wrestle and finding different ways to get out of it, kind of being very sneaky here. So I guess Eddie gets his wish because he's not on this pay-per-view tonight. Also not on the show tonight, only the WCW champion, Bill Goldberg. And man, the more I go back and look through this time period, the more you think, man, they really, really screwed Bill Goldberg over with this title run. Because yes, he is still easily one of the most popular entities in WCW right now. Every time he shows up, the crowd goes absolutely ape, no matter where he is or what he's really doing. Because what he's doing right now isn't really much. He's not involved in any of the storylines involving guys like Hogan and Nash and Sting or Hart, any of these actual names. He's going against guys like Meng and Rick Fuller and Al Green, Mr. If You're Some Karate. He's going against these jobbers essentially, and he's mowing through them really quickly. And yeah, that's fun and everything. He's not exactly defending the belt against top guys at the moment. It's pretty sad here, and it's crazy he's not even on this show, but more on that later. 11,528 folks have packed the venue for this sold-out event. The third year in a row Fall Brawl takes place in this venue. 275,000 pay-per-view buys is up big from 195,000 the previous year. On the call, Tony Schiavone, Bobby Heenan, and Iron Mike Tenay. They go over the new rules for War Games. Traditionally, it was 2 teams of 4/5, and the match officially begins once all the people are in the ring. But no, this year it's different. There are 3 teams of 3 where there are 2 people who start out, and then the remaining team members will be selected and entered at random. So it's not like one team gets a particular advantage. And unlike previous iterations of War Games, and future iterations for that matter, where it's, the match doesn't end until everyone's in the ring and then it's submit or surrender, it's pinfalls are now allowed, and the match can end at any time. Somebody can just pin somebody before all 9 guys are in the ring, and the match could end. Okay, Some big "We Want Flair" chants as they're trying to explain the rules, by the way. We go backstage and see some kind of scuffle being broken up between Ernest the Cat Miller and Norman Smiley. We saw them get into it on Thunder the week before. And a great line from commentary, he's had a lot of problems with people who think he's not great. They tossed a Mean Gene Okerlund at the stage, running down some more of the big matches of the evening. Suddenly in comes the TV champion Chris Jericho, and he's been on a great run lately as the TV champion, the king of all loopholes, as he is frequently referred to on commentary. And actually on Thunder, I think a week before this, he established the fact that, well, since WCW people have told me that this company is primarily a TV show, that means that the television championship is actually more important than every other belt, including the World Championship. And he goes into a bit more of that here in this promo. He says, "Hi guys," to the fans, and he's got a scoop. He says that someone was too big for his britches and got upset that Jericho got some backstage footage for his entrance last week, and it's Goldberg. He says Goldberg's been whining and complaining, calling him on his cellular telephone, and Jericho says he's made a challenge, title for title, Jericho versus Goldberg. So, the world champion is going to be on hand tonight. Maybe. We'll have to see. Your opening matchup sees the Dancing Fools, Disco Inferno and Alex Wright taking on the British Bulldog and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Wikipedia erroneously saying Tokyo Magnum is accompanying Disco and Alex to the ring. That is not the case. And really, there's not much build for this match. I seem to recall there's like a backstage segment where I think like the Bulldog and Neidhart jump Disco and Alex in the back, or maybe it's in reverse. I could be wrong. That's basically the start, the genesis of this matchup here. Starting out with Davey Boy Smith and Alex Wright, Bulldog showing off the power. Similar story with Neidhart and Disco. Neidhart with some mockery. Disco gives it back to him a little bit. Bulldog showing some agility out of the corner. Wright still kicks him down. Disco thrown out of the ring, and Jimmy Jam beats him up on the outside. Things are looking rough all of a sudden. There's this weird collision with Disco and Bulldog. Davey Boy goes to drop Disco on the top rope, but he misses. What's going on here? I'm hearing some, I can't tell if it's "We Want Brett" or "We Want Flair" chants, because we did see a little bit of interaction with Brett and Jim and Bulldog like last week on TV, but it was like when Brett was, you thought he was going to join them beating up Lex Luger, but he actually beat them up instead in order to try and curry favor with Sting and the rest of the Wolfpack. Davey Boy goes to launch Neidhart over the rope, but Disco gets out of the way of the human projectile. In comes Wright with a beaut of a missile dropkick, a nice run by Das Wunderkind. We get a drop down by the ref, a leapfrog by Bulldog, and an accidental collision with the Dancing Fools. Bulldog's back is fooked here, and he can barely get Disco up for the running power slam. He is still able to hit it. He and Neidhart win. The match is just kind of there for me. Alex Wright, I think, his athleticism in this match really shines through in this one. And this is the match where famously Bulldog injures his back, taking a bump on the trap door in the ring, which is set up for the Ultimate Warrior or his stand-in for the main event here. And that is really the beginning of the end of the Bulldog's career, sadly, because he would try and work through the pain. And you can see here by the end, he's really struggling. It's hard to tell which bump in particular is really setting it off here. But by the end, when he's doing that power slam, he can barely get Disco up. That's what's going on here. And so he'll try to work through it a little bit afterward, but it ends up hospitalizing him and sets him off in this whole downward spiral where he gets hooked on pain pills and whatnot. And there's it's a really sad story, but he's able to recover enough to make it a return to the WWF soon after this, about a year or so later. But, it's not the same Bulldog that we knew. And so it's pretty sad that this is kind of the match. This is the beginning of where that all starts to fall apart for him. Mean Gene's backstage with Scott Steiner. He's heard a rumor that you won't be able to wrestle your brother Rick tonight. What's the deal, Mr. Pump? He's got a couple of Band-Aids on his arm, an ice pack on his back, and Buff Bagwell produces a doctor's note saying Scott is injured and can't wrestle tonight. Mean Gene brings in a board of directors member J.J. Dillon. He's reading the document and says, well, this is unfortunate. It's unfortunate you took the time and trouble to produce this bogus document. That's not going to fly. Dillon reiterates what he said at Road Wild, where this match is going to happen because if it doesn't, Scott is going to be barred from WCW for life. One of the best moments of the show happens here where Dillon rips the note to shreds and we see Scotty crawling on his hands and knees to grab the bits of paper as Dillon is storming off. That is amazing. Well, it's time for the bonus matchup here. Championship versus championship as Chris Jericho is set to take on Bill Goldberg. And we see Jericho coming out here with that crack security staff, a accompanying him from the locker room to the arena, mocking Goldberg's famous entrance. And hey, there's Ralphus before he became famous, and a Kenny Powers lookalike. They're wandering the halls, trying to find their way to the ring. It's very Spinal Tap. Jericho did something very similar to this on Thunder a week or two before. He goes to the door to the outside. Uh-oh, not falling for that again. Finally makes his way to the entrance and gets some disappointing pyro. And look, right now, at the time I'm filming this, Jericho is in a program again with Orange Cassidy. The fact that Chris Jericho in 98 gets some very Orange Cassidy-like pyro for this show, that coincidence is not lost on me. So we hear Goldberg's music play, we get the chant, we see the pyro, and when the pyro fades away, it's some other bald guy with a toy belt. This is a fantastic reveal, by the way, just from a production standpoint, because you get the crowd reaction afterward. Heenan is cracking up over it to see that reveal. That was pretty good.
That's 10-karat gold right there.
Shivani calls Chris Jericho as the match begins. There's a big bullshit chant as Jericho throws the fake Goldberg around. Copperberg actually hits a spear, which gets a nice pop, but Jericho boots him down immediately, gets some stomps in, puts in the Lion Tamer, and holds on to it for ages as Jericho is declared the winner. Jericho 1, Goldberg 0. This right here is a 5-star segment to me, and this is honestly the highlight of the entire show, even though it's kind of fucked for a couple of reasons. Now, I think the comedy by Jericho here is fantastic. Again, parodying Goldberg's entrance with the security, then the fake Goldberg, the way they revealed it, and, you know, Jericho getting that heat. It's just incredible this idea literally goes nowhere. Because first of all, you've pissed the fans off by kind of saying, oh, the champion is going to be here tonight, and then he's not. And it's not even a thing where the real Goldberg shows up and then hits Jericho after the fact. Like, that would have been a great way to resolve it. Or, you know, that would be the result of what Jericho's doing. Because this is going to go on for several weeks, where Jericho is in this basically one-sided rivalry with Goldberg, where he's like, oh, Goldberg's ducking me this and that. And like the logic dictates, well, clearly this is going to end in a really quick squash match against Jericho. And that's what Jericho basically wanted, and that's what he asked for. But then they were like, no, Goldberg doesn't want to do it. And so the fact they even gave Jericho the permission to start something like this, if they even had an inkling of an idea that this wasn't going to fly or that Goldberg didn't want to do it, why would they allow him to do this in the first place? Because it's a great segment and you would love to see it reach its natural conclusion, but right now it's just kind of like, it's just in the wind, and it's just a great way for Jericho to get heat. But then the way Goldberg, his failure to respond or his unwillingness to work with Jericho in this, I think if you're fighting, you know, Mang and Al Green and all that shit, it would be an improvement to have a quick squash match with the World TV Champion. It's just crazy to me. And again, you piss off the fans by like, you're honey dicking them essentially, because Goldberg is not advertised. You think he's going to be there, and he's just not there at all. We're in the web zone with Rick Steiner, who's talking about his upcoming match with Scotty. And then they once again show this interview from Thunder where Mike Tenay is trying to interview Scott and Steve Armstrong. Let's all look into the sun together as we go along with this generic promo. In comes the cat, Ernest Miller, who interrupts and wants some TV time. He's a 3-time World Karate Champion. Bobby Heenan just looking on in the background, very visible here, as Ernest comes back and sneak attacks the Armstrongs, and Norman Smiley breaks it up. So what, was that backstage bit at the top of the show just them redoing it inside? Also on commentary, they acknowledge the fact that Heenan was in the background the whole time, and a great line from Bobby here where he says, I wasn't eavesdropping, I was lurking. That takes us to our next matchup here as the Cat takes on Norman Smiley. Cat on the mic reiterating that by law he's required to tell you he is a 3-time World Karate Champion. He could take Smiley out in 5 seconds, but since they're both brothers, he's going to give him a head start and a chance to leave the ring before he puts the hurt on Norman. So he turns around, he counts to 5, turns back around, and Norman's still very much there. The match begins and Norman's off to a good start, but Miller kicks him right in the mush on the outside and takes over. Karate chop, karate kick. Smiley comes back with a big spinning back suplex. The Cat's begging off, throws up a black power fist in solidarity, but Norman's having none of it. More back and forth, Ernest with a judo throw, bringing Smiley down, but Norman fights back with a stalling vertical. Cat knocks Norman off the turnbuckle, hits a top rope feliner. It's a nice looking move if only it connected. He does it again, regular type, and pins to win. I'm going to give it 1 star out of 5. Sadly, had that finisher connected from the top rope, it would have been more impressive. It wouldn't have been a very good heel move, but it would have been an impressive maneuver there. But yeah, one thing that Ernest Miller is not doing a lot of at this point in his career is selling. Like, he doesn't sell anything that Norman's given him, really. And it's just not a very pretty matchup because Ernest Miller is so green and Norman can only do so much with it. It's so sad to see the number of poorly rated Norman Smiley matches I've covered here in this series, because he is generally working with the worst people and he can only do so much. It's going to be so much easier for him when he becomes a coach at the Performance Center, I would imagine. Ernest Miller here, he is kind of a freshly turned heel, he's getting into that character. Because I talked earlier when I mentioned Ernest Miller and how entertaining he is doing the James Brown thing. He's nowhere near there yet, but he is getting there, and it just sucks that we didn't get to hear his terrible network dub. Up next, it's brother versus brother as Rick Steiner takes on Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner. At Super Brawl earlier in the year, Scott turned on Rick mid-tag title match and joined the NWO to become Big Papa Pump. He's joined forces with Buff Bagwell, and for weeks and months, Scott has been ducking fighting his brother, faking injuries, faking illnesses. For a few weeks on TV, they've had a quack doctor hanging around with them, Dr. Cecil Schwartz, who just looks like a total weirdo hanging out with them. And then when he actually gets to talk, all he gets to say is, "Right on." This stuff has been pretty funny, honestly, watching Scott and Buff be these two total cowards. That, again, I've mentioned before, it's one of my favorite tropes in wrestling. The big, huge, muscular dudes who are total cowards when anyone's trying to fight them. And, it's been funny to see this chase going on for so long with Rick trying to pursue Scott, and now Scott is finally forced to wrestle Rick here, despite all of his attempts to try and get out of things. And they've had Buff dressed up as Rick Steiner and doing the whole mockery thing, and he's been ducking and dodging with all these doctor's notes and whatnot, but it's finally going to happen here. After some stalling by Scott, they finally come to blows. Rick is all over his brother, and the fans are loving it. The physicality for what we see here is actually really fun. Scott takes Rick to Dick Kick City after Buff has distracted the ref. Scott's now stomping away at his brother. On commentary, they're trying to further explain, Scott's descent and turning into the NWO. Oh, because they've promised him, movies and money and big homes, and I can only imagine restaurant franchises as well. I'm loving the hair on this kid in the hard cam as Rick is fighting back. He goozles Buff and rams him into the ring post. Buff is down from this and is not moving. The referee checks on him. He tells the wrestlers to stop fighting. Buff's neck is hurt, you guys. We have to stop the match. Buff is saying it's the same thing. It's the same thing, the same neck injury he'd previously suffered at the hands of Rick Steiner several months ago and had just come back from. The fans are chanting bullshit and they're playing up on this past injury, and Rick and Scott, they've stopped fighting. They kind of dropped character to have this really moment of concern. Things come to a halt. We have trainers, referees, EMTs down. Buff is being tended to. As Tony says, this is very serious. Of course, Bobby Heenan still has to throw some levity in.
Marine, you've had neck surgery. I had neck surgery 3 years ago. So.
Mike, have you ever had your neck injured?
No, I haven't, but
Wait
I know
till later.
This all goes on for 9 minutes. I timed it between when Buff goes down and the time they spend to get him checked, get him on the gurney, get him wheeled through the building and into the ambulance. The ambulance doors finally close. Rick turns around looking sad. Then, psych, out comes Scott and a totally healthy Buff Bagwell who beat up Rick in the back. Gotcha! And that's pretty much that whole segment. And it's Shivani with a line saying, "There's a new form of jerk. It's called being a buff." I give it -3 stars out of 5. This was not a segment you should do on a pay-per-view. This feels like a TV segment because what you've done right now in this pay-per-view is you've already brought things to this huge halt by stopping it and making it believe that everything's real, and it takes all this time to get it out of the ring, and then boom, it's another deception where they've already had the stalling for weeks and weeks and weeks up to this point. So, you want that match to happen. The blow-up doesn't even happen until Halloween Havoc. So we are waiting and waiting even longer for this, but this feels like the kind of heat you should get, again, on television, not on pay-per-view, because, time's expensive when you use the pay-per-view satellite time, and the fact they waste it all on this nothing of a match is pretty frustrating, and you run the risk of just killing the crowd dead with something like this. Well, here's a match that's happening. Juventud Guerrera defends the WCW Cruiserweight title against Silver King, the future Ramses from Nacho Libre. Juvi has been killing it in the Cruiserweight division as of late. He was apparently supposed to wrestle Kaz Hayashi on this show, but then on the Saturday night before the pay-per-view, they just changed it to Silver King, who's been doing okay on programming as of late, but by no means like positioned as a contender of any kind. Like with Rey Mysterio injured, the Cruiserweight division does feel like something is significantly lacking right now, and there's just doesn't have the same kind of pep, and it's certainly being de-emphasized compared to how it used to be during the prime of Nitro. Juvi takes Silver King down with head scissors, then a minute later this big springboard Hurricane Rana that Silver King stands still all day for. King spins the champ around and hurls him into the ropes. Awesome triangle dive to the outside onto Juvi. Back in the ring, Juvi tries to go for a sunset flip but just slips and crashes hard on his neck. Ouch. He manages to recover, he comes back, hits a big missile drop kick. Juvi with an early poison Rana off the top, only gets a 2 count. Silver King fights back, goes for a springboard moonsault off the top but gets none of it. Juvi driver followed up with a nice 450 and Guerrera retains. I'm going to give it 2.5 stars out of 5. It's a nice change of pace, especially from the last match, but it is certainly one of the most unique matches we're going to get on this show. It's one of the most complete ones as well. And there's nice action here, despite a couple of slip-ups here and there. Again, it's sad that the Cruiserweight division, it's there, it's presented, but it just doesn't feel like it has the same kind of oomph that it did even just a year ago. Because again, you look at the contenders that Juvi is facing, like he was facing a young pre-3 count, no one knows who he is, Evan Courageous, and he's fighting Silver King like twice in 2 or 3 weeks, and it's just not the same, you know? Back at the internet location, Konnan is being interviewed talking about his upcoming opponent, Scott Hall, who just shows up with a drink in hand. They're talking over each other, then Scott throws his drink in K-Dog's face. Lee Marshall, can you please break this up?
For Christ's sake, get these bitches out of here, Dave.
Up next, one of the strongest built mid-card storylines in WCW right now. It's a fight for the future of the Flock and for one man's soul as Raven takes on Saturn. Now, Saturn is a former Flock member. He has broken away from the group and is trying to get his other fellow Flock members to do the same. And this has been going on for quite a long time. Konnan even briefly partnered with Saturn in this fight until he betrayed him and went back to the Flock himself. Now, during the build for this match, Saturn loses a match to Lodi, where he becomes Lodi's servant until the pay-per-view, and Saturn honors the deal because he's an honorable man and his word is his bond, so he just keeps his head up and does Lodi's bidding for the most part. Then Raven tests Saturn by telling him to break Scotty Riggs' fingers or he breaks Saturn's. Saturn, who is muy conflicted, allows them to break his fingies. Then on the Go Home Thunder, Saturn has thrown Lodi into the river, and with him gone, that apparently breaks the spell and allows Saturn to get a measure of revenge on Konnan and the Flock. And the big crux about this angle now for Saturn is this isn't just about freedom for the Flock, this is about freedom for me, and it's about my honor and my integrity. So they're really building Saturn as this stand-up guy who is one of the only people who seems to be able to withstand Raven's mind control and stand up in the face of this evil, brooding man and trying to, basically save his own life, essentially, now more so than even the other Flock members. So if Saturn wins, Raven must set the Flock free, but if Raven wins, Saturn must be his servant for the rest of his career. Also, Konnan will be handcuffed to ringside. That's not a Raven's rule, but a Dylan's rule. Doug Dillinger giving referee Mickey J the key. Bet that won't backfire. Raven saying Saturn has been an embarrassment, and tonight is the start of his indentured servitude. Saturn rebuts, this match is about honor, and you have none, and win or lose, I'll still have my integrity. Wow, that's gonna rattle Raven. Saturn comes at Raven, but he strikes first and is on the attack. Saturn comes back, hits a springboard, a big top rope splash, Lodi with a cheap shot on the outside. Raven looks to be yawning a couple of times mid-match, I noticed. Raven with some consecutive Russian leg sweeps, that looks nice. He brings a chair in, does the drop toe hold onto Saturn, who lands face first. Now out come Horace and Sick Boy with the table. They set it up outside. Kidman now comes off the top, maybe going for that shooting star press perhaps. No, he hits Raven with a drop kick. A huge pop from the crowd as he is now chased out by the flock members. Saturn hits the Death Valley driver. He's got it won, but the referee is distracted long enough for Raven to kick out. Huge Saturn chant now. He fires up again. He gets the rings of Saturn locked in, but Lodi yoinks Saturn away. Looks like a double team is about to happen, but Saturn fights it off. The referee is smooshed. Kanyon shockingly grabs the key from the referee's pockets, frees himself from the cuffs. He hits Saturn with the flatliner, rolls Raven on top, cuffs himself back up. Saturn barely kicks out. Saturn low blows Raven, hits the Death Valley driver on Lodi off the apron and through the table, but he walks right into an even flow DDT. Aw, damn, here we go. Oh shit, it's a kick out. Saturn comes back, hits the Death Valley driver again, the cover and the win. I'm going to give this one 4 stars out of 5. I mean, I loved this matchup here. This had all the bullshit in it, and there were some times where I was genuinely like, I was hooked. I thought, oh my God, it's going to be a fuck finish, and oh, Saturn's going to get screwed out of the thing. But he fights back, and he still wins. He overcomes all those odds, and the way the crowd was just totally into it as well. I think it was a really well-executed match. It's easily the best, match of the entire show. Like Jericho and the fake Goldberg, I think that's still the big highlight, but as far as a straight bell-to-bell match, this tells the best story, has the most satisfying conclusion, and it's a great look for Saturn because he looks like absolute money here, the way he's able to fight off all those different members of the flock, get that little assist to Kidman who shows he's got a conscience and everything, and that's going to set off his big singles run in the Cruiserweight division. Yeah, man, this was definitely the high point of Fall Brawl 98 by a country mile. Well, last week at a live show, Hacksaw Jim Duggan announced to the world that he had been diagnosed with cancer and he was going to go under the knife that week to try and remove the tumor. They give us an update on this show to announce that doctors got the whole tumor about the size of a football off of his kidneys. It was a malignant tumor, but the doctors got all the cancer out and would go home tomorrow, which is great news. And obviously, Hacksaw would continue to get back into wrestling after his recovery, go on for a long time. And to further prove just how much of a badass Hacksaw is, only a year or two ago from where I'm airing this right now, he would survive cancer yet again. So, big props to Hacksaw. That man's a hell of a fighter, and he's been that way for a very long time. Up next, a big grudge match as Dean Malenko takes on the NWO's Curt Hennig, who's accompanied by Rick Rude. Malenko has had it out for Hennig ever since his part in destroying the Four Horsemen, an act that began last year at Fall Brawl when Hennig betrayed the Horsemen and slammed Ric Flair's head in that War Games door and putting him out of action. Malenko has lately been on a campaign to get the Horsemen back together, trying to get Mongo back on board, Arn Anderson and Chris Benoit all on the same side to various effects here. Arn is the last holdout. Finally, he makes his choice when he saves Malenko from an NWO beatdown in the steel cage on Nitro the previous week. And Arn says the Horsemen may never get back together, but in his eyes, Malenko is a Horseman. Hennig is wearing his best NWO athletic shorts for the match. We get big "We Want Flair" chants as the match begins, and they go over the anniversary date, how close we are to the anniversary of Hennig's betrayal. And Heenan's like, how do you know this? He knows everything. He knows the ingredients in the McDonald's secret sauce. Curt tries to escape and act like his leg is hurt for shootsies, but no one's buying that shit anymore. Malenko goes back to the leg. Hennig goes for the eyes for about the 3rd or 4th time in the match. Rick Rude is also helping out, a cheap shot to Malenko. Dean hits the Hennigplex onto Hennig himself, but Rude gets in the ring and stomps Dean. Match ends in a DQ. Rude and Hennig with a double team. Then Arn Anderson comes in to make the save, and he's down. There's more Flair chants. The baddies attack Arn's already weakened arm that he's meant to arm wrestle with this Thursday on Thunder, and it's time to push the NWO button on the soundboard. I give it 2.5 stars out of 5. It was a solid match, and then the ending happens here, and the fans have got to be disappointed here because the fans have been kind of conditioned to believe that Ric Flair is coming back, not necessarily tonight, because they will have the big famous Horseman reunion the following night on Nitro. That is one of the biggest moments in company history, is this Horseman reunion. Flair comes back for the first time since his lawsuit with WCW, his big confrontation with Bischoff. Fire me! I'm already fired! Fire me! I'm already fired! And so the thing about the arm wrestling match that they're supposed to have on Thunder, it's supposed to be like this determines whether or not the Horsemen can reunite. But they taped that Thunder before Fall Brawl. So at this point, Flair has not come back in the timeline from when they're doing this. So there's no Flair being mentioned on this episode of Thunder after Flair comes back and the Horsemen reunite. And then it ends in a big schmoz anyway, because what can you do? How can you have anything going on in this company without the NWO wiping their balls all over something? And speaking of the NWO and something that wipes balls, hey everyone, it's Last Call Scott Hall. He's got a drink in his hand, stumbling around to the ring with Vincent by his side as he gets ready to take on Konnan from the NWO Wolfpack. Hey, it's not just Vince McMahon who treats the addicts in his company like shit. Scott surveys the crowd. He asks if they're there to see the original black and white or the lame old Wolfpack. Big pop for the red and black, but Hall says, score one for the good guys, that meaning him. Konnan says a lot of words very quickly, gives a shout out to the North Carolina State Wolfpack. Suddenly Hall seems a lot more coordinated once the bell rings. They exchange pleasantries. They also trade head slaps. K-Dog hits that rolling lariat. Hall tries to escape and ends up falling into the abyss between the two rings, and Schiavone's like, we've never seen that before. I'm like, hello, I just reviewed a show from 4 years ago where Terry Funk did the exact same thing. And I'm sure there's been at least 1 or 2 cases of it happening between 94 and 98. Vincent with a distraction that allows Hall to sneak in from the other end, but Konnan cuts him off. Hall with a surfboard hold for a very long time, taking the occasional drink break mid-match here. The crowd at one point, they're all looking at something just over there. Hall stops taking care of business. He goes back to his drink. Konnan kicks it in his face, hits the face buster, locks in the tequila sunrise. Hall taps out, and K-Dog wins one for the Wolfpack. I give it 1.5 stars out of 5. The match is just so-so, and again, if you look at it just from bell to bell, and if you ignore the times where he goes to take a drink, you really can't tell Scott is like drunk in this matchup. He's not falling over himself. He's like basically just kind of doing kind of a boring match with Konnan. And so the character is just more like it's a put on when he's like stumbling all over himself and slurring his words in the pre-match, whatever, the introduction. And Eric Bischoff has certainly made it very publicly known his regret and his remorse over booking Scott Hall like this and exploiting his substance abuse issues for the purpose of a storyline. And so I'm not going to rake him over the coals, here, because he's done that to himself enough times. But yeah, it's still worth pointing out that, yeah, it's just a sign of the times. It's just in poor taste. And, it's not the first time it's happened, and it's not the last in wrestling history, as we have seen. So it's a sad footnote in the life and the career of Scott Hall and WCW. The fact they did take this and exploited it. And, I've mentioned it before, so I won't beat the dead horse, but it is pretty shitty. And hey, speaking of shitty, are we ready for the main event? It's War Games, kinda. It's gonna be 3 teams fighting in this one. It's gonna be Team NWO Black and White, Team NWO Wolfpack, and Team WCW. But as Michael Buffer explains in the rules for this one, it actually plays out more like a casino gauntlet match in a cage, now that I think about it, because it's going to be 3 teams of 3, but you've got 2 people starting it. You've got every other person entering at random, regardless of team affiliation. And like I mentioned, the first person to score a pinfall, even if all 9 people aren't in the ring yet, then the match is over. And the winner of this match gets a title shot against Bill Goldberg next month at Halloween Havoc. And so here are the team breakdowns. I put them down here on the screen. Bret Hart in the last couple of weeks has been doing these things again to try and gain the trust of Sting. Like at one point Sting gives him the bat and turns his back to Bret. Bret doesn't hit him with it, and then there's this moment where Bret beats up Jim and Bulldog to save Lex Luger. And so Hulk doesn't like what Bret is doing and initially kicks him out of the team and says, no, the Giant's going to be in this one. But then J.J. Dillon's like, nah, he's going to stay in the match regardless. And so that doesn't really play into much of what we see in this matchup here, because it is every man for himself. And DDP is the team captain, for all that means, in Team WCW. And you've got the interim commissioner, Roddy Piper, who's there, and he says, yeah, I'm gonna be in your team. And so then they add the Warrior to it. But again, them adding the Warrior makes no sense from the perspective of the Warrior is supposed to be just after Hogan, the one Warrior Nation, and they've done no real interacting with each other on camera, or Warriors really hasn't even acknowledged the fact that he's gonna be in the War Games match and fighting alongside Piper and DDP against Hogan. He's just very singularly focused toward Hollywood Hogan. I will say I always love seeing the cage pyro when it descends. They play the same dramatic song for the cage lowering, for Diamond Dallas Page, and for Bret Hart's intros. He is the current US champ, by the way. It starts out with Page and Hart. They're going back and forth for those first 5 minutes. Then in comes new NWO member Stevie Ray. He recently joined the group after possibly betraying his brother Booker T, who came back from injury. It's implied he jumped Booker T before his match with Bret Hart, but I don't think it's ever officially confirmed. But this is how they try and put Stevie over as his own man. Now he's joined the NWO and has broken away from Booker T. Up next, in comes Sting of the Red and Black. He leaps from one ring to the next and damn near spikes himself on the way down as he hits Stevie Ray. Out next is Roddy Piper, hitting everybody because it's every man for himself in this team-based match, biting Stevie in the face. The camera misses something cool with Sting and Stevie Ray in the crevice between the rings. Up next, the total package Lex Luger. Just a whole lot of nothing going on in those 2 rings for a while until Kevin Nash comes to the ring with pyro, no less. Less than a minute later, though, Hollywood Hogan jumps the timer and enters the ring with a slapjack. Who cares about the rules? Hogan and Stevie attacking their own guy in Bret Hart. Hogan drops the leg on Kevin Nash in a very natural spot in the ring. Suddenly, the ring fills with smoke. We see the Warrior in the ring, but Hogan quickly takes him down. Suddenly, we get more smoke. It goes away, and the Warrior has vanished. Where is he gone? And then with a few seconds to go, the real Warrior runs into the ring and goes right after Hogan. In reality, it was the Renegade, who actually, if you recall, was brought in specifically to be the Ultimate Warrior ripoff back in 1995. He was the stand-in for Warrior in that decoy moment in the ring, which is incredibly ironic. The Disciple, or as Warrior called him in his debut promo, Hogan's barber, pulls Hogan out of the ring. Then they lock the cage shut, keeping Hogan from possibly getting back in the ring to win the match and that title shot. Great strategy. A caged Warrior busts out from the chain link, injures himself going down, and chases after Hogan. Holy shit, this show is cursed. Stevie swings the slapjack at DDP, who I think ducks it. I think Bret sells like he's been hit as Sting pulls him down. We get the Diamond Cutter to Stevie Ray, the cover and the win for Page. He's won the world title shot at Halloween Havoc. He exits the rings and makes his way through the crowd to celebrate as the show goes off the air. I give it -1 star out of 5. Man, they should have called this something else because this shit was not War Games. This was just, changing rules for the sake of changing the rules. There was nothing wrong with the rules they had in place with War Games, and what you had here instead was just the most motley crew of wrestlers, some of which had no business being in this matchup. And that's kind of how I felt watching the 94 matchup with the Nasties and the Rhodeses going against the Stud Stable. But hey, Robert Parker shitting his pants was way better than anything you saw in this War Games matchup. This all, of course, is going to lead to what happens at Halloween Havoc, and really a tale of 2 matches here. You have the all-time stinker with Hogan and Warrior and the botched flash paper and whatnot, and then, of course, the all-time great matchup with DDP and Goldberg for the championship in the main event that hardly anyone actually saw. My grade for WCW Fall Brawl 98 is an F+. Like, I will give them the high comedy of Jericho and the Goldberg impersonator and the really good storytelling of Saturn and Raven, but besides that, it feels like almost everything else on this show was done with the explicit intent of pissing the fans off. You've got, even though the Jericho Goldberg impersonator thing was funny, they really pissed the fans off by not giving them an actual Goldberg appearance, I think. You have that really just like slow down, just kill the crowd kind of moment with the Buff Bagwell fake neck injury, whatnot. And then you've got the worst War Games of all time, or at least one of the worst War Games matches to wrap it all up. And this show has been regarded as one of the worst of 1998, if not the worst. And look, across the board in 98, wrestling is on the upswing. It is cool to like wrestling, across the WWF and WCW. Numbers are really good, ratings, buy rates, it's all doing well for both companies. But just from a storytelling perspective and just an execution perspective on this show, it is just not good. It is dog crap for the most part. And this show is, there's a couple of bright spots, but overall, really terrible show. But what did you think of Fall Brawl 98? Let me know in the comment section below. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it. Subscribe to Wrestling with Regret. Hit that bell icon for all the notifications. Hey, well, you know what? The wheels are falling off of WCW in the fall of 98, but we can always look back at the salad days of around this time period in 1996, because the NWO is still strong. It's still very much on the uptick for WCW. We're going to look at Halloween Havoc 1996, where the main event is Randy Savage taking on Hollywood Hogan months before they join forces for no reason. We also get the debut of an icon. That's happening in 2 weeks. But until then, I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.